Alrighty, YouTube, it's your boy Zxous, and we're back with another Goddess of Victory Nikke video. And in today's video, we're going to be reviewing the rankings that Pridewin ended up giving for both Helm and ANIS. ANIS's came out a while back, but I wanted to wait for hers to come out, or not for hers to come out with Helm, but for Helm's to come out so I could do both of them at the same time. I've already seen the rankings, and I'm not gonna lie, for the ANIS one, it's valid. I'm not going to say the Helm one is not valid, but it's definitely surprising for me, I will say, right? So if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe and like. This is something we usually do when, you know, a character comes out in Nikke. We rank them on my own tier list that I've been doing for the last, I don't even know how much months, right? And then obviously we follow up that video essentially with these rankings that Pridewin put up themselves. So, let's start off with Helm, right? Because she's the more newer character. So her rankings are very surprising, and it might be very surprising for a lot of people, right? C in PvP, which is very fine. S in boss solos, S in boss ads, SS in boss solos, S for late game of story, and SS for story early. Now, these rankings are valid, but probably not for the reason that you think. Right, so I'm going to assume, right, let me read the pros and cons before I tell you guys what I'm going to think this is based on, right? So the pros are, burst cooldown reduction is a great mechanic. It is. Easy to fit in a lot of teams due to being a 20-second burst skill. That is fine. Bullies electric bosses. Yup, she does that perfectly fine. Damage taken debuff, which makes her great for bossing, but only against the electric enemies, literally. So I don't know, because when it says bully electric bosses, that's because of the damage taken debuff. So I don't know if this is meant, like, these are two, this is basically the exact same thing. Those are two pros that are the same. No, bullies electric, she bullies electric bosses because of the damage taken debuff that she gives to electric bosses, right? We'll come back to there. And then deals decent damage output for burst 2 unit, right? She does, obviously. The only, like, the top 3 hitting or hardest hitting burst 3 units would probably be Guilty, Rupee, and then this Helm, right? There's not many options. That's why, obviously, she's a bit higher there in the burst 2 option for DPS. Her cons are, while she's still decent against non-electric bosses, there's a lot of alternatives that you can use instead of her, right? There is that as well, right? Now, when they say decent against non-electric bosses, I'm assuming they mean in terms of her support mechanic and the little damage she can do. Because besides that, I mean, obviously she's doing nothing else, right? If she's not doing damage or she's not doing the cooldown, I mean, the character's not even working at all, right? Obviously, so there's that, right? And a limited unit, so unless you max limit break her now, you'll have to wait a year for her rerun. I don't know if they know if you actually are waiting. Like, I don't know how reruns work in this game. We've never had a rerun, so I don't know if we actually have to wait a full year for reruns. I'm assuming we are. That's what everybody's assuming, but we'll really figure out this upcoming Christmas when, if they rerun the An and Rupee banner, but we'll see. But let's see. So I want to say they're giving her SS and S mainly for the cooldown reduction and that she's a 20-second burst 2 unit. Right, and then also they're including this. So for example, when it says SS in boss solos, it's not SS in bosses in general. Like, the SS is not because she's that crazy against bosses in general. It's because she's good against bosses that are electric, right? Obviously, bosses in general and how she performs against bosses in general is most likely getting implemented there. But I want to say her against electric bosses is definitely carrying her rank here for the SS boss solos, right? And then with ads, again, it's probably still the same way. Now for story and stuff like that, I'm going to assume it's mainly the damage reduction. Because if you're not fighting electric enemies, regardless if they're a boss or if they are a regular enemy, she doesn't have that skill. But then again, for story, because she does the decent damage of the burst 2 unit, that's what it's mainly, you know, being implemented here. So let me kind of break it like this. For story early, what's being implemented in that ranking heavenly is clearly the cooldown and the damage, right? And then also because she's a 20-second burst cooldown. That's what's being implemented here. Late game of story, it's the exact same thing, but in late game, you have much better options. Early game, you can really use anybody and get, I don't want to say you can use anybody and get far, but like early game, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, realistically, as long as you have the power higher, you're going to beat it at the end of the day. right? So, but when you get to late game, that's when there's better options, probably why she's S. For boss solos, fantastic character when it comes to everything, right? That's when everything of the pros get implemented. So when it comes to story, I want to say only this and this. So the cooldown reduction, the 20-second burst, and then also decent damage where burst 2 is being implemented. C, obviously in PvP, she just doesn't make sense there, right? She's just not going to work there regardless. But there's that, right? And then for boss ads, it's kind of the same thing because she loses the electric or she doesn't lose the electric debuff, but if there's mobs there as well, it's like randomly, right? So it's not guaranteed to go on the boss. I do think, and I don't understand this part though. This is 2 pros, but it's the same thing, right? So a pro is that she bullies electric bosses, and then the second part is that damage taken debuff, which makes her great against bossing, but only against electric enemies. Isn't that the same thing? Because she bullies electric bosses because of the damage taken debuff, which they state here. So I don't know if this is a mistake or whatever, but this is 2 of the same thing essentially, right? Literally. But yeah, I mean, the rankings here are for me. When I did my tiers, I put her in, I think I put her in B tier, right? And it's because I was going over in general. So honestly, when it comes to, if you're like, when you're using her, I said the only thing that she's going to have is her damage and the cooldown, right? But there's just way better options and stuff like that. But I guess as a unit herself, did she make these rankings? Of course, right? I think she does. I think their pros and cons are valid. Yeah, I would say their pros and cons are valid. And the rankings, like, you can kind of see why they rank them that, you know, early. So I'd say the rankings for Helm is very, very valid as well, right? If you guys want to read the review, the website to this is always in my description, or you can just read it here on the screen. Now let's talk about ANIS. Now ANIS obviously is insane, right? SSS in PvP, SSS in boss solos, SSS in boss ads, and then SS in boss or in story early and story late. So pros and cons for Helm is that one of the current meta DPS with high value support skills well with overload and investment and skill investments, because obviously of the final attack. Technically, I guess they should have put that here too, right? I mean, maybe she doesn't scale well with it, I guess. Not Helm, at least. Still strong with lower investments, thankfully. Makes Scarlet great again. Okay, that's I mean, it's a decent pro. I mean, this pro, okay, makes Scarlet great again. Scarlet was always good, obviously, but they probably should have said make electric characters good, right? I don't know. Bullies water bosses. Yeah, that's true. Despite being a shotgun user, she deals decent damage against far enemies due to her skill too. Well, that's obvious, right? Obviously, it doesn't matter where the enemy is on the screen, right? It just procs to the enemy with the highest attack. If they're all the way at the end, it's gonna hit them all the way at the end, right? If they're very up close, like that's just obvious right there, right? For most people, her skill 2 hits at most 2 enemies, which can prove meaningful against mobs and bosses with ads such as Mother Will. Very true, right? So I do think Helm as a DPS is great. I think what makes Helm great is that you can use her as a support or a DPS, but even when you're using her as a quote-unquote support, she's still doing great damage, right? So you're not using her as a support or a DPS, you're using her as a support and a DPS, right? It's a very, very good combination for this character. She is the only burst 3 supporter in the game as well, so remember that. Cons: support skills only buff electric units. So okay, sure, this is a pro and a con, but I honestly think if this was to buff up all units, then that would be too much. Imagine if she increased the attack and reload speed of all allies on top of Privity already doing that for all allies. Way too much, honestly. That's way too much, right? So this is like a pro and a con in my opinion. Her DPS decreases significantly if not paired up with Privity due to ammo reduction. That is true. It is true. Because even if you get her burst skill to level 9, for example, when you're not using her burst skill, she's only going to have 5 bullets. With Privity, you're either going to have 1 bullet with her burst skill, and then when you're not in her burst skill, you're going to have 2 bullets maximum. Pretty good, right? Without Privity, she needs her burst skill to be at least at her burst skill level to be at least 9 to reduce her ammo to 1, which is really expensive. It is. but there's no but. Really, there's no but there. It is just expensive, right? Yeah, I mean, it's really just is a con right there, right? Last hit mechanic limits the flexibility of team compositions. Any max ammo buffs should be avoided. Yeah, it sucks though. I would say it's a con. A very big con with this character for me is that in most situations you can't use her with bunny girls, right? You can't use her with litter, and like, or you can use her with litter if you want. You can use her with bunny girls if you want, but you shouldn't go about using them or her with those characters. And it sucks because those are like top 10 characters of the game, right? So a lot of the best characters in the game who do increase ammo capacity are the characters that can't be ran with this character, unfortunately, no matter what, right? She does not gain further benefits from reload speed beyond 90% due to fire rate restrictions. So, yeah, I mean that's fine, but I think only her burst skill and her thing should be more than enough to get it there. But yeah, she doesn't go beyond 90 because of the fire rate restriction, right? But I do think this character overall, like, her cons are not stuff that are really hurting her, essentially. They're just like restrictions, or, you know, it's not like her cons are hurting her, essentially. Like, her only buffing up electric units doesn't make her a bad unit, because the electric characters are good characters in this game, right? Scarlet, Haran, Guillotine, right? Maiden, if you use Maiden, Isabel, if you use Isabel, right? Those are good characters if you're using them, or at least those are characters that get the buff if you're using them, right? So I would say the cons for ANIS from Pride Win are not cons that are hurting her. They're just cons that are, like, you know, just kind of just remember these type things, right? You just gotta note these simple facts about her. But yeah, I'd say the rankings for these two are very fair. I know a lot of people are gonna probably look at this one, especially hearing from most YouTubers that she's not that great of a unit, right? I think a lot of YouTubers, if not every YouTuber, said she wasn't that great of a unit. Right, they're probably going to be very surprised with these rankings, but when you like go about it and you just read their pros and cons, it makes sense, right? For early, just the cooldown reduction, 20-second burst skill, and decent damage as a burst 2, probably top 3 DPS as a burst 2, is all that she needs for a burst 2. Remember, she's not a burst 3 unit, she's not a main DPS. For a burst 2 character, fantastic. So it's going to be very nice in early PvP, or early story and late story. Bosses, solos, and boss S, mainly electric bosses, but obviously the cooldown, the damage, and the 20-second burst are still implemented there for the bosses. That's probably why they ranked her that high, right? So I think a lot of people are really going to be concerned about this one, but if you really do go about it, it does really make sense. But again, you can always read the reviews for more if you need to, right? The link's always in the description for their website. Hey, Pride One, if you're watching this, hit me up, bro. If you want to sponsor, or not sponsor, I don't know what it'd be, partnership, whatever. But it's your boy Zxous. I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm out. Peace.